All right. Ready to dive into something I bet you're already thinking about with Election Day coming up?
Hmm.
Taxes.
Yeah.
Specifically, how this election, 2024,
Right.
could totally change what we all owe depending on whether it's Harris or Trump who wins.
Absolutely.
So, to help us really break down what both candidates are proposing,
Yeah.
we're turning to the experts over at the Penn Wharton Budget Model.
Right.
They're the ones who build these incredibly detailed models to try and predict
Yeah.
how different policies will actually play out in the real world.
Like a simulation?
Exactly. A financial simulator, but for the entire U.S. economy.
The whole thing.
I know. Crazy, right? But luckily, we've got their two brand new reports from August,
Okay.
where they analyze both the Harris and the Trump tax plans.
Head to head.
So we're going to be your guide today, walking you through what they found,
Right.
what it means for you listening, for your wallet,
For sure.
and the big questions you should be asking as you make your decision this November.
Sounds good. Ready to get started.
You bet. Let's jump right in with Harris's plan first.
Okay.
Now, her big thing, her focus, is really on giving those low and middle income households a boost.
Okay. Interesting.
We're talking about expanding programs, things you've probably heard of, like the child tax credit.
I've heard of that one.
So, under her plan, families would get up to $3,600 per child.
Wow.
And get this, it'd be fully refundable.
What do you mean?
Even if you don't owe any taxes, you still get that money back.
Oh, wow. That's a big deal.
Huge. And it doesn't stop there. There are also changes to the earned income tax credit
Oh,
to make it better for people without kids, which is often overlooked.
right. Right.
Plus, making those boosted Affordable Care Act subsidies permanent.
So more people can afford health insurance.
Exactly. Oh, and I almost forgot. She wants to help those first-time homebuyers, too.
In this market.
I know. Tough out there.
Yeah.
But she's talking about an average of $25,000 in help over 4 years.
Okay. That's significant.
Right. So that's pretty good on paper, right?
It does, but, and I know you're going to get into this, the question is always, how do we pay for it?
That's the million-dollar question, or should I say trillion-dollar question?
Right.
Because you're right. Someone always has to pick up the tab. That's just how it goes.
Sadly, yes.
So spill the beans. How does Harris plan to pay for all this?
Well, she's proposing we bump up those corporate taxes
Okay.
from the current 21% up to 28%.
So rewind on that big corporate tax cut from a few years back.
Basically, yeah, at least partially.
So it's a trade-off then.
Exactly.
Help for families, but potentially higher taxes for those big corporations.
Right.
But I have a feeling it's going to be more complicated than that.
Oh, you know it.
Because it's not just about moving money from one group to another, right?
Not at all.
It's got to impact the entire economy.
100%.
And that's where these models that Penn Wharton creates come in, trying to figure out those ripple effects.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into the numbers. What did they find when they ran Harris's plan through their simulator?
Okay, so first, imagine we just look at the immediate effects of the plan.
So no fancy economic calculations?
None. Just the surface.
What happens?
In that scenario, Harris's plan would add $1.2 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years.
Okay, so I was going to make a joke about finding it in the couch cushions.
Right.
But 1.2 trillion, that'd be one big couch.
Sure.
But you said that's just the surface level, right?
Exactly. The real interesting part is when you factor in all those economic ripple effects.
Like how businesses might react.
Exactly. Will they invest less? Will consumers spend less? All of that.
Okay, and what happens when you factor all that in?
Those deficits balloon, they go to $2 trillion.
Wow, so double the impact just from how the economy might react.
It's like throwing a pebble in a pond. The ripples spread further than you think.
And what do those ripples mean for the economy as a whole then?
Well, according to their model, by 2034, the U.S. economy, measured by GDP,
Right.
it could be 1.3% smaller than if we didn't change anything. And get this, within 30 years, it could be a whopping 4% smaller.
So help for families now,
Yeah.
but a smaller economy down the road.
That's the potential trade-off.
So are there any clear winners then in this scenario?
Well, if we only look at who gets more money in their pocket, and again, this is just one piece of the puzzle,
Right.
lower and middle-income households, they'd likely see those gains in the short term.
From the expanded credits and benefits and all that.
Yeah, exactly. But remember, this doesn't factor in those long-term economic impacts we just talked about.
It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. You fix one side and suddenly...
But the side is messed up.
Exactly.
And we haven't even gotten to those hidden costs, like the impact of that growing national debt.
On future generations.
Exactly.
Right. Can't forget about them. But, okay, so we've covered Harris's plan, targeted help, but with those potential long-term downsides.
Right.
So let's flip the script. Head to the other side of the aisle.
Okay.
What's the Trump tax plan all about?
In a nutshell, tax cuts, and more tax cuts.
Music to some voters' ears, I'm sure.
For sure. But the question is it too good to be true?
So walk us through it. What's he actually proposing?
Well, he basically wants to double down on those tax cuts we saw a few years back.
The TCJA ones, right?
Those are the ones, but this time he's talking about making them permanent.
Okay, so locking them in for good for individuals and businesses.
Exactly.
Anything else? What else is he planning?
Oh, this is a big one. He wants to completely eliminate taxes on those Social Security benefits.
Now, that's something I'm sure a lot of retirees wouldn't mind seeing.
Right.
But wouldn't that, I don't know, blow a huge hole in the budget?
Well,
Social Security isn't exactly funded by spare change.
you're not wrong. It's a huge source of government revenue.
Right.
It is, but Trump's plan doesn't stop there.
Oh, no.
He also wants to slash that corporate tax rate even further.
Further than it already is.
Oh, yeah, down to 15%.
Wow, remind me what Harris wanted to do.
Raise it to 28%.
Right, so complete opposite ends of the spectrum here.
Couldn't be more different.
Talk about a different approach, but let's be real. I mean, tax cuts.
Yeah.
They sound great during those campaign speeches.
Of course. Who doesn't love the sound of that?
But when it comes to actually governing, it's about making tough choices, right?
Always trade-offs.
So let's put Trump's plan through that same simulator, that Penn Wharton model.
Okay.
Does it hold up? What happens?
Well, get ready. The numbers are even more eye-popping than with Harris's plan.
Oh, boy.
So conventionally, just looking at the immediate impact,
Okay.
we're talking about adding a massive $5.8 trillion to the deficit over 10 years.
Okay, so now we're talking some serious money.
We are. That's more than double what Harris's plan adds.
And what about when you factor in all those ripple effects, like we talked about?
So even with those potential positive effects from the tax cuts,
Stimulating the economy and all that.
yeah, we're still looking at a $4.1 trillion increase to the deficit.
So short term, maybe it looks good, but long term, what's the damage?
That's where it gets interesting. The models suggest there might be a little bump to the economy at first.
Okay.
But within 30 years, GDP, it could actually end up 2.1% lower than if we stuck with the current loss.
So both plans potentially leading to a smaller economy down the line.
That's what the model shows.
Not exactly a ringing endorsement for either candidate.
It's not, but remember, these models are complex. There's a lot going on.
Right.
And it's not just about the size of the economy, but who benefits too.
Okay, that's a good point.
And under Trump's plan, well, at least according to this model,
Yeah.
all income groups would see an increase in their after-tax income.
Wait, hold on. So everyone comes out ahead under his plan.
On paper, yes.
I don't buy it. There's got to be a catch, right?
Well, remember those long-term consequences we talked about?
The national debt.
Exactly. That burden has to fall on someone, and usually it's future generations.
Right, and plus this is all just a model, right?
It is.
Doesn't account for things like inflation.
Exactly, or any unexpected global events that could throw everything off.
Exactly. So it's a lot to consider.
It really is.
So both plans have their pros and cons, it seems.
For sure.
It's like choosing between, I don't know, a big, delicious piece of cake
Okay.
and a healthy salad.
I see what you're saying.
Both appealing in different ways, but with potentially very different long-term consequences.
And you can only choose one.
Exactly, which makes it even harder.
This is what makes those policy decisions so difficult.
Absolutely. No easy answers here. But before we get too deep in the weeds,
Yeah,
you mentioned something earlier about state and local taxes.
I did.
And I think it's something a lot of people forget about.
Oh, they're crucial.
Because federal taxes, those aren't the only ones we pay.
Not at all. In fact, those state and local taxes,
Right.
those are the ones that often have a bigger impact on our day-to-day lives.
Exactly. And states, cities, they need money to function too.
Of course, they need it for everything.
Schools, roads, parks, you name it.
The whole 9 yards.
And how do they get that money? Taxes.
Right, but it's those other taxes.
Property taxes, sales taxes.
State income tax.
Right. All that stuff.
For we often forget about.
So let's talk about how Harris's plan might trickle down then, with those boosted safety nets and potentially higher corporate taxes.
So it gets complicated.
Because every state manages their money a little differently, right?
Exactly. But generally, if the federal government's spending more,
On those social programs,
it could mean less money going to the states.
which means they have to get creative.
They do.
Either raise taxes, which no one likes to do,
Not popular.
or cut services, which hurts everyone.
Or find savings, which is tough.
Tough spot to be in. And what about Trump's plan then?
Yeah,
Those federal tax cuts, they sound great.
in theory.
But how could they impact states?
Well, one outcome is the federal government has less to give to states.
Less for infrastructure, education, all that.
Exactly.
So then states are stuck.
Kinda. They have to either raise taxes or cut services to make ends meet.
Talk about unintended consequences.
Right. It shows how interconnected our entire tax system is.
One big game of dominoes.
It really is.
You knock one over and...
It all comes tumbling down.
So as a listener, what can I do? What questions should I be asking?
That's the right question to ask first and foremost. Don't get caught up in just the immediate impacts.
So not just about whether my refund check is bigger or smaller next year?
Exactly. Think long term.
Okay.
How might these plans affect the overall health of the economy, both nationally and where you live?
Both, right. It's not just about the country as a whole.
Exactly.
It's about my state, my local community.
Don't be afraid to dig into the details a bit.
Go beyond the headlines.
Exactly. What are they actually proposing, and how does that line up with your values?
Your priorities, right.
It's about being informed.
Making those tough decisions because there's trade-offs everywhere.
Always.
And this is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Of course.
We've talked about the economic side, but taxes,
They impact everything.
they impact our society,
Social programs.
how we support each other.
It's about the kind of future we want to build.
And those are conversations we need to be having.
We do.
It's like you said, taxes, they're about more than just
Right.
the numbers on a spreadsheet.
Way more.
They reflect our values as a society, right?
Exactly.
What we choose to prioritize, how we support each other.
Are we investing in things like education, infrastructure, or are we more focused on those tax cuts?
For the wealthy.
Right. Are we making sure everyone can afford health care?
Healthcare is huge.
Or are we okay with a system where only some can afford to get sick?
It's a big question, and these are the things we should all be thinking about
Absolutely.
as we look at these tax plans and make our decision this November.
Because there's no easy answers.
No easy answers.
It's about weighing those priorities, right?
Exactly.
And deciding what we want that future to look like.
What kind of world are we building? That's the question.
Together.
So, to everyone listening, as you learn more about each candidate, try to look past those catchy slogans
Sound bites.
and really think about what those proposals mean in the long run.
Not just for you, but for everyone.
Think about how they line up with what you believe in,
What you value.
your vision for the future.
And don't be afraid to talk to people who see things differently than you.
That's so important.
Have those conversations, those respectful dialogues.
Because that's how we bridge those divides.
Find that common ground.
Right. We're all in this together, after all. It can't just be about staying in our own echo chambers.
How to get out of those.
We need to be willing to listen to each other.
And learn from each other.
Well said. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
I think so too.
Hopefully this has given everyone some food for thought.
Some things to mull over.
Maybe spark some conversations around the dinner table.
That's what we like to hear.
Right.
Engaging with these issues.
Exactly. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
And to all our listeners, as always, thanks for being here, and we'll catch you next time.